Right now, your website is probably invisible to AI search, and the frustrating part is it might not have anything to do with your content quality, because the way AI search works is completely different than your typical Google SEO, which means if you're not specifically optimizing your website for AI, then you're most likely not going to rank there at all. And it turns out in 2026, over a third of website visitors choose to start their research with AI tools instead of Google. Plus, this number is only rising as the years go by. So if you're not optimizing your website to show up in these AI searches, you're missing out on a ton of future potential clients. Now, that's why in this video, I'm going to be showing you exactly what you need to change so that AI search engines can actually surface your website in the simplest, fastest way possible. And these are tactics that we've been implementing at our agency across hundreds of different clients. Now, before we jump into what you need to change on your pages, you do need to understand why you can't treat AI the same way you treat traditional search engines. Because most people make the mistake of assuming that it's the same exact thing as Google SEO, just with a different name. And they're wrong, because AI search engines like ChatGPT, Perplexity, and Claude don't crawl and rank websites the same way Google does. They don't care about keywords you use or backlinks you use. Instead, they ingest your content, process it, and use that information to create an answer to whatever question your user's asking. That means your page doesn't get ranked. Instead, it helps AI either answer a question that gets mentioned in the search results or it doesn't get used at all. But that's not even the biggest difference, because on top of this change in the way AI uses your content, it also has a hard intake limit of around 2,000 words. So while you may have gotten bonus SEO points in the past for writing longer content that follows the take what your competitor does and add more rule, none of that really matters to AI, because everything after 2,000 words just gets ignored. Instead, it's the structure of your content and the way that you format it that makes all the difference. Now, the first thing you need to do is accept that when trying to get your website recommended by AI is that the rules for what makes a winning web page have changed. That means the way you structure your website needs to change too. Instead of just focusing on long paragraphs filled with keywords and important information, you need to think about how AI search actually works, because all it really does is take that first 2,000 word window and decide whether or not your page is going to be the best answer for the user's question. So if you got a word count of 10,000 and your main point doesn't show up until paragraph 12, AI has already stopped reading and has moved on to the next competitor. And that's why the first principle for getting AI to pay attention to your website is keeping your content bite-sized. Aim for 1,000 to 2,000 words per page, lead with your clearest possible summary, and treat each point as its own short, contained section instead of one long wall of text. Your second principle is breaking your content into digestible formats that AI actually can recognize. Features like accordions, sliders, content blurbs, and most importantly, FAQs on every page. See, AI is trained to recognize specific page structures long before it actually pays attention to what the content says. And FAQs are one of those features that it looks for. So if you're building or rebuilding service pages in 2026 without an FAQ section, you're losing out on the additional visibility you could be getting with it. And lastly, the third principle is keeping your content concise. The more efficiently and clearly you communicate, the more of your page gets processed. So instead of loading sentences with complicated language for the sake of keywords, focus on getting every point across as simply as possible. Once you build your pages using these three principles, AI engines can ingest your content faster, understand it more clearly, and surface it more consistently in results potential buyers actually see. And even just a few small changes like these can make a real difference in how you compare to your competitors, because the truth is very few businesses are actually doing any of this. Instead, they're still building pages the old way, and it's quietly robbing them of new customers and leads. Let me show you a real example. So I want to talk about this tool that's kind of been a secret weapon for us when it comes to AI, SEO, and GEO. It's called Spyglasses. It's actually built by a company here local to Pittsburgh, so it's pretty cool to be able to support a local business and have a really amazing tool at our fingertips. But basically, it does for AI search what other tools like SEMrush and whatnot have historically done for traditional search, and then it goes like a few different layers deeper as well. So using a local construction company that we have, Franjo Construction, I went ahead and I ran this AI visibility report for them, and you'll see right off the top there's this executive summary that they provide, And it's basically its interpretation of, what key details are being pulled from search. So you can see it's doing a pretty good job of summarizing the organization. It's also highlighting things like key competitors. So again, it's getting a really good landscape right off the bat in terms of this particular organization. Then when it comes to individual performance and AI visibility of performance, this is where we can kind of see the benchmark of where they're at. So it's really illuminating, I guess, in terms of, just like where any business stands with AI search. So here you can see that there's 0 brand mentions, 0% share of the voice, and 0 citation. So essentially invisible on AI search for this particular company. When we look at just the grounding searches, you can kind of see how many searches were used as part of this initial test. It'll also get into things like brand consistency. So brand consistency is not always indicative of search, as you can see. So their brand consistency scores are not great, but they're also not horrible. However, their visibility in search is still poor. Reason being comes down to the content and structure, which we'll talk about a little bit later in this video. And we'll actually be using these guys as our example for kind of putting it all together and what those improvements look like. Again, when we look at things in here, we can see their technical foundation is strong too. That's great. It still doesn't necessarily translate to AI search because, again, AI search is very much content focused, content heavy. So even though you have some of these foundational things set right in terms of, the technical side, it doesn't always necessarily translate to visibility. Again, as we get in here, there's going to give you a summary of recommendations. If we want to go and view detailed recommendations, I can click on this button and it's going to give me a whole slew of more detailed recommendations from what things to fix regarding the brand, what things to fix regarding the share of voice, and what things to just fix in general for both traditional and AEO search results. So lots of really good actionable insights in here. And you can see like some of these queries, like top commercial construction companies for integrated projects, right? Like that is a huge money term that you would want to show up for if you were Franjo Construction, and they don't have any visibility there. So that's where we can start to pick apart specific insights. Other thing that this tool does really well is that it also gives you insights on exactly what searches they use to test, which no other tool that I've worked with does that. So you can use the insights from these actual searches to then kind of like backwards engineer what kind of content you want to include on the page itself. Lots of really cool stuff that comes out of this particular tool. And again, lots of ways that we can use this strategically to inform content decisions that we make on home pages, service pages, industry pages, what have you, throughout a site. If you don't want to waste your time learning how to audit your website and restructure it for AI yourself, you can book a call using the link below. We've worked with over 500 companies like Boston Dynamics, Hit Contracting, Skyline Construction, and STV Inc., and we've turned their websites into consistent revenue sources, not just by optimizing for AI, but focusing on conversions as well. So if you'd like to see what we can do for you, just book a call using the link in the description below. All right, so now you know what's wrong with most pages and the 3 principles behind fixing them, but just knowing what needs to change is only half the battle. What's even more important is the execution, because sure, you can just dive right in and start cutting down your word count and adding FAQs to your page. And yes, it probably will help over time, but the truth is the single most impactful thing you can do to fix any page to get it seen by AI is the very first section of your page. That's because AI engines prioritize what's on the top of the page over everything else. So if that first section clearly summarizes the intent of everything that comes after it, that's what AI processes and focuses on most. Think of it like writing a TLDR for your page at the very top. As long as you're encapsulating everything you're going to cover in those first few sentences, AI knows the rest is worth its time. And the best part is you don't have to spend hours trying to figure out exactly what to do on your own, because the best way to write for AI is going to be using AI. So all you need to do is actually jump into ChatGPT and get it to generate the right content for you. Let me show you how. All right, so here's the real cheat code. We are optimizing for LLM-based searches. We're optimizing for GEO results. Yeah, we can do some of the figuring out on our own, but why not leverage the actual platforms that we'd be showing up in to help us further optimize for it, right? So that's essentially what this prompt stack does. It's leveraging, in this particular case, OpenAI ChatGPT to just give us the insights we want, and then use those insights to essentially optimize what an opening statement, specifically like a sub paragraph in that opening section of the web page, could be. First prompt here in the stack is basically we're asking ChatGPT to give us what it knows about LLM search optimization. We don't necessarily need to sit here and read what the output is, but you can see it's providing some really good insights, a lot of insights that align directly with what we're talking about in this video. This is essentially priming ChatGPT and getting it to be in the right mindset for the questions that we ask next. Then what we're going to do in the second prompt is we're going to actually have it review a specific page on a particular site. In this case, we're using that Franjo construction site again as our example. And what it's going to do is basically like look through that page, index the information of that page in its database, just keep a log of it. And where the magic happens is in this last step. So basically what this last prompt is it is taking the context of what LLMs are looking for. It takes the context of the target page, and then what we want to do is we don't want to just have it regurgitate an overview one for one of what the contents of the page is. We still want there to be some sales intent. That's why this particular prompt uses this specific language that is focused on the outcomes, not just a summary. So when we do this, you'll see the end result is a very concise explanation of what the page is about, and it still has some sales focus in it. So this is copy that is not just going to appeal to LLMs, it's going to appeal to the prospective buyer who's visiting this page, who might be considering Franjo for a build out project in this particular case. So this is a really simple prompt that you can run on any website, any page within a website, and it's a really good way of just kind of like quickly summarizing and optimizing that initial section, and it can be used again and again and again and again. All right. At this point, you understand how AI search actually works, and you know the structure it's looking for, and you've seen even how something as simple as your opening section can completely change how your page gets interpreted. But here's the thing, individually, each of these things help, but on their own, that's not exactly what moves the needle in a meaningful way, because AI doesn't evaluate your page based on one section. It evaluates the entire thing as a system, which means the real impact happens when all of these pieces are working together. When your page is the right length, when your content is structured in a way that AI can actually process, when your key points are broken into clear, digestible sections, and when your opening immediately tells AI exactly what the rest of the page is about. That's when your site stops getting ignored and starts getting used to build answers. And the difference between those two things is everything, because one version of your site just exists and the other becomes a consistent source of traffic, visibility, and leads from AI search. So instead of talking about this in theory, let me show you exactly what this looks like with a real world example when it's all applied together. Start with their existing page. So you open it up, the opening statement is just kind of like a repeat of Franjo companies, and then it's saying full service general contracting in PA, West Virginia, Ohio, and Florida. If we scroll down, there's a paragraph here that talks a little bit about what they do, but mostly about their heritage and their background as an organization. And then if you scroll even further down, it's a link to their mission. And that's it. There's really not too much else going on with this particular homepage. And when you look at that report that we had pulled earlier and you are assessing their AI search visibility and lack thereof in terms of some of those hits, a lot of it has to do with the fact that this homepage in particular does not have a lot of information on it, and the information it does have is not really sectioned or indexable. So let's flip over to the example that we put together as what like a potential redesign of this could be. First and foremost, when we are looking at this opening section, there's a couple of different things that are happening simultaneously. So you'll see at the very top, there's this little eyebrow text that says commercial building general contractor. One of the things that we do strategically, and we find that this works really well both for AI search as well as traditional search, is we'll actually leverage this direct match term as the H1 on the page. Traditionally, the H1 on the page is supposed to be the largest text that you see, but really semantically, it just needs to come first. This is just a little hack that we've learned over the years that actually does make an impact in terms of both traditional search and AI search. So in this case, we're calling calling out specifically what type of company they are. We're making this the H1 tag, and this is going to be a really good direct match. Then we can use a little bit more marketing language for the H2 that maybe is a little bit more aspirational and not necessarily keyword focused. So, in this headline, if you can dream it, we can build it. It's kind of more of a marketing headline that's still alludes to what they do, but isn't necessarily riddled with a bunch of keywords. What we do then do is pair the sub headline in this particular case to have a little bit more of those key terms. So, this is going to use terms like construction, it's going to use commercial construction, and it's going to talk a bit to outcomes as well. So it's doing a dual purpose of summarizing what they do, what type of company they are, and it's also speaking to what outcomes customers could potentially experience. This opening header is doing a lot more work for them in this particular case than the current version of the site. As we scroll down, then this is where we can really start to optimize for what these engines are looking for, right? So we help developers and businesses in 5 key areas. So we're putting we're planting a flag in the ground, and we're saying this is what they do in these 5 key areas. Then each one of those key areas are clearly titled, and then there is some sub copy to go along with each one of those titles that really gives you some additional context. So again, when we're thinking about how these AI search engines are functioning, they're looking for these types of sections, right? They're looking for, okay, what services do you offer? How do you help these customers? We're stating it really, really clearly here, and we're giving them additional context in specific sub areas. If we scroll even further down, I know in their current example, it alludes to what areas they service, but it's not called out super directly. Here, instead, we're calling it out super directly. So we're saying national contracting, sophistication, regional focus. These are the regions that they serve, and we're making it really, really clear in this particular section exactly what regions they serve. So it's both highlighted visually, but then it's also communicated in text, so you're kind of bringing that together. Then we can talk a little bit more specifically about the type of projects that they do. So again, this is giving you more context in terms of, okay, we've covered what services they do, we've covered where they do these services. Now we're going to cover more specifically the type of work that they do, and calling that out with several different examples that then link out to portfolio sections within their site. We're also reinforcing in each one of these project tiles where the project has occurred, so that continues to reinforce the regionality that's previously stated. There's also additional details in here in terms of what type of service it was and the just kind of like square footage dominance. So these are all things that are super relevant to the LLM, but these are also things that if I was a developer or a commercial entity and I was looking for somebody to do this work, this is going to be just as important to me as it is to the LLMs. So then as we continue a little bit further down the page, this is where we can use facts. I know I spoke about how important FAQs are for service pages. They're also important for your homepage. They're really a tool that you should be using everywhere else. And this is where we can really drill into some of these topics, and we're doing it again in a way where it's bite-sized, it's easy to digest, and this is answering real buyer questions. So, again, what type of projects does Franjo work on? What services does it provide before construction begins? What does design build look like, and how do they support it? And so on and so forth. So again, answering a lot of questions that folks might have in that discovery phase directly on this homepage. And then last but not least, this isn't necessarily something that impacts the LLM search as much, but we want to always end a page with a call to action to get them to take that next step, because as you know, a lot of people are going to convert earlier on in the experience, but if somebody gets to the bottom, they're probably pretty engaged, or at the very least, they're a lot more educated by the time they've reached the bottom of the page as they did the top. So it's always best practice for us to reinforce that with a call to action that somebody can gravitate to. That's pretty much it. So, you can kind of see the before and after of where this potentially takes Franjo from an AI search perspective, and just how much more context you can get out of a homepage to answer some of those key questions so that you get more of that search visibility. And that's exactly how you start optimizing any page on your website for AI search. But if your pages were never structured properly to begin with, then none of this will actually help, because ChatGPT can only use the information you give it, and if that information isn't up to standard in the first place, nothing it generates is going to be useful. So if you want to see how to build a high converting product page and then how you can optimize that for AI, watch this video next. I'll see you there.